Evelyn Jackson stood in Liberty Regional Airport's chaotic terminal, her janitor's uniform wrinkled and faded, as 30 staff members stumbled out in handcuffs, badges yanked, faces drained of color. Travelers froze, jaws dropped, whispers buzzing like flies. Yesterday she was a shadow mopping floors. Today, she toppled a kingdom. Her lips twitched with a hidden grin. One cruel word had sparked this, but the wreckage would haunt her life forever. What twisted path led here? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe for more explosive stories. Evelyn Jackson adjusted the stiff collar of her gray janitor's uniform, the fabric scratching her neck like sandpaper as she stepped into the humming chaos of Liberty Regional Airport. At 62, she'd seen plenty in her years as a nurse, stitching up wounds and soothing fears, but nothing prepared her for this. Her daughter, Cassandra, ran this place as CEO, and for months, she'd come home with stories of venomous staff, a culture festering under the glossy surface of flight schedules and coffee stands. Evelyn had heard enough. She wasn't one to sit idle while poison spread, so she'd hatched a plan over a cup of black tea in her cramped kitchen 2 nights ago. She'd go in, eyes wide, ears sharp, and see it for herself. No one would suspect a stooped black woman in a thrift store, outfit pushing a mop. She'd be invisible, just like they wanted her to be. Cassandra had laughed at first, then nodded, her face tight with worry. "Mama, be careful," she'd said. Evelyn had just smirked. Careful wasn't how you fought rot. You dug it out. So here she was, boots squeaking on the polished tiles of Terminal C, her salt and pepper hair tucked under a cheap cap, a recorder the size of a matchbox humming silently in her pocket. The air smelled of jet fuel and pretzel grease, thick with the chatter of travelers dragging suitcases and barking into phones. She gripped her cleaning cart, its wheels wobbling like a drunk toddler, and rolled toward Gate 12, blending into the background noise of a Wednesday afternoon. She'd barely gone 20 feet when a voice sliced through the din, sharp and cold as a scalpel. "Hey you, scrub the filth by Gate 12 now." She turned her head just enough to catch the speaker, a white man in his 30s, wiry and pinched, with a badge pinned to his chest that read Todd, Shift Supervisor. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, thumbs jabbing at the screen, not even bothering to look at her. She swallowed the heat rising in her throat, years of dealing with men like him teaching her to keep it buried. "Yes, sir," she said, voice low and steady, the kind she'd used on drunk patients who thought they could swing. She pushed the cart forward, the recorder catching every syllable of his disdain. The floor by Gate 12 gleamed, not a speck of dirt in sight, but she bent anyway, dragging the mop in slow circles, letting the rhythm calm her pulse. She'd expected this, the casual dismissal, the assumption she was less than the gum stuck under their shoes. It stung, sure, but it was fuel. She'd prove it wasn't just talk Cassandra brought home. As she worked, a shadow fell across the tiles, broad and heavy. She glanced up to see a black baggage handler, maybe 25, muscles straining under his orange vest as he heaved a suitcase onto a conveyor. His name tag flashed Jamal in block letters. He caught her eye, offered a quick nod, and muttered, "Rough day already, huh?" His voice was soft, worn at the edges like he'd learned to keep it small. She gave a faint smile, the first real one since she'd walked in. "You have no idea," she said, her tone dry as dust. He chuckled, then hustled off, shoulders hunched like he expected a whip to crack. She jotted his name in a tiny notebook tucked in her apron, her pen scratching quick and quiet. A friend, maybe. She'd need those. The moment passed and she straightened, ready to move on, thinking she'd gotten the lay of the land. Todd's bark had been the opening shot, a taste of what Cassandra meant, and she'd caught it clean. She could build on this, gather more, show her daughter the proof she needed to swing the axe. She felt a flicker of pride, the kind that came from knowing you'd outsmarted the room without them even noticing. She pushed the cart toward Gate 13, her steps light, her mind already spinning out the next move. Then it happened. A sharp jolt rocked her hands as the cart lurched, nearly tipping. She stumbled, catching herself on the handle, and looked up to see Todd looming over her, his phone finally pocketed. His face was red, veins bulging at his temples, and his breath stank of stale coffee. "Move, hag!" he snapped, his bony shoulder slamming the cart again, sending a spray bottle clattering to the floor. She froze, the word cutting deeper than the shove. Hag. Not just an insult, but a dismissal, a stripping away of everything she'd built in her 62 years. Her fingers tightened on the handle, knuckles whitening, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced worse in emergency rooms, racist cops sneering over bleeding patients, but this was different. This was personal. Her daughter's kingdom, her legacy, and this punk thought he could kick her like trash. She forced her lips into a thin line, nodded once, and said, "Sorry, sir," her voice a blade wrapped in cotton. He snorted, already, turning away, muttering something about lazy help as he stalked off. She stood there, chest heaving, the recorder still whirring against her hip. The airport buzzed around her, oblivious, travelers rushing past, announcements crackling overhead, but all she heard was the echo of that word. Hag. She bent to pick up the bottle, her knees creaking, and slipped it back onto the cart. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a fire she hadn't felt in years. She'd come here to watch, to listen, to gather. But Todd had just lit a match, and she wasn't about to let it fizzle out. She glanced at the clock above gate 12, its red digits glowing 3:32. She'd been here less than an hour, and already the mask of civility was peeling off this place. She thought of Cassandra, sitting in her glass office upstairs, trusting her to dig up the truth. Evelyn squared her shoulders, the weight of the uniform suddenly lighter. She'd expected slights, sure, but not this fast, not this raw. Todd didn't know it yet, but he'd just made himself her first target. She pulled the notebook out again, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote his name in bold, underlining it twice. Then she added Jamal's, circling it with a question mark. Allies were gold in a war like this, and she'd need every speck she could find. She tucked the notebook away, her mind racing. She'd come in thinking she'd play it slow, collect crumbs over days, maybe weeks. But Todd's shove had changed the game. This wasn't just about watching anymore. It was about fighting. She pushed the cart forward, the wobble in its wheels matching the tremor in her gut. She'd seen the first crack in Liberty's facade, and it was uglier than she'd imagined. She thought of her daughter's tired eyes, the way Cassandra's voice broke when she talked about losing control of her own airport. Evelyn had promised to fix it, and she would. But as she rolled past gate 13, a chill crept up her spine. Todd was just one voice, one pair of hands. If he was this bold, what else was hiding in these terminals? She passed a group of gate agents laughing over their phones, their eyes sliding over her like she was part of the furniture. She kept her head down, but her ears stayed open. The recorder buzzed against her thigh, a tiny heartbeat of defiance. She'd come here to see how deep the rot went, and now she knew it wasn't just deep. It was alive, pulsing, and ready to bite. She reached for her mop, dipping it into the bucket with a splash, and started scrubbing again. Not because the floor needed it, but because she needed the cover. She'd play their game, let them think she was nothing. But every word, every shove, every sneer was going into that recorder, into that notebook. She'd build a mountain of it, and when the time came, she'd bury them under it. She glanced at Todd's retreating back, his wiry frame disappearing into the crowd. He thought he'd won, thought he'd put her in her place. She almost pitied him. Almost. Because Evelyn Jackson didn't break. She bent, sure, but only to pick up the pieces she'd used to cut you down. She wiped her hands on her apron, the rough fabric scraping her palms, and pushed the cart toward the next gate. The day was young, and she had work to do. Liberty Regional. Airport wasn't ready for her, but she was ready for it. And by the time she was done, they'd wish they'd never let her through the door. Evelyn Jackson rolled her creaky cart through the crowded lanes of Liberty Regional Airport, the sting of Todd's shove still burning in her chest. She'd come here to peel back the layers of this place, to see what her daughter Cassandra had been fighting against, and already the ugliness was spilling out like oil from a cracked drum. She kept her head low, the gray cap shadowing her eyes, but her mind was a storm. That wiry punk Todd had called her a hag, slammed her cart like she was nothing, and walked off thinking he'd won. She'd prove him wrong. She trailed him now, keeping 10 paces back, blending into the shuffle of travelers hauling overstuffed bags and whining kids. He strutted toward gate 15, his phone back in his hand, thumbs dancing over the screen like he was king of this concrete jungle. She parked her cart near a trash can, pretending to fuss with a bag of dripping coffee cups, but her eyes locked on him. He stopped by the baggage claim, where Jamal, the young black handler she'd met earlier, was wrestling a suitcase twice his size onto a belt. Sweat beaded on Jamal's forehead, his orange vest sticking to his broad back, but he moved. With a quiet grit she recognized from her nursing days, the kind that kept you going when the world wanted you down. Todd didn't see that. He leaned against a pillar, his voice cutting through the hum of the terminal. "Pick it up, Jamal. You're tossing like a damn snail." Evelyn's jaw tightened, her fingers curling around the mop handle. She watched Jamal flinch, just a flicker, before he nodded and heaved another bag, his arms trembling but steady. Not 2 minutes later, a white worker, Mike, sauntered up, his gut spilling over his belt, his pace barely a jog. He tossed a duffel onto the belt with a lazy grunt and wiped his brow. Todd grinned, a crooked slash across his face, and threw Mike a fist bump. "No worries, man, traffic's a killer today, huh?" Mike chuckled, a wheezy sound, and vanished into the break room, leaving Jamal to haul the rest alone. Evelyn's blood boiled. Same job, same bags, but one got a slap on the back while the other got a boot in the teeth. She pulled out her notebook, the pages already crinkling from her grip, and scribbled Todd's name again, circling it this time, then added Jamal's with a star. She'd seen this dance before, white folks gliding by while black folks carried the load, but seeing it here, in her daughter's airport, lit a fire she couldn't douse. She tucked the notebook away and rolled her cart closer, the recorder in her pocket buzzing like a hornet ready to sting. She needed more, something concrete to shove in Cassandra's face and say, "See, this is what you're up against." She was about to move on when a new voice slithered into her ears, high and sharp, like a nail on glass. "Hey, slow shuffle. You gonna mop or just stand there gawking?" Evelyn turned, slow and deliberate, to find a gate agent perched behind the counter at gate 15. The woman was white, maybe 30, with a blonde ponytail pulled so tight it stretched her smirk into something feral. Her badge read Lisa, and her eyes raked over Evelyn like she was a stain on the carpet. "Guess age and color don't mix well," Lisa added, loud enough for a couple of passengers to snicker. Evelyn's chest went tight, the air in her lungs turning to lead. She'd heard worse in her 62 years, sure, but this was different. This was bold, public, a dare to fight back. She forced a nod, muttering, "Yes, ma'am," and dragged her mop across the floor, the water sloshing in the bucket like her churning gut. Lisa laughed, a brittle sound, and turned back to her computer, dismissing her. Evelyn's pen flew across a fresh page, Lisa's name joining Todd's, the ink digging into the paper. She'd caught two now, two voices dripping with the kind of hate that didn't hide behind smiles. She thought she had enough. A solid start to show Cassandra the rot wasn't just rumors. She slipped behind a pillar, fished a burner phone from her apron, and dialed her daughter. "Cass, it's me," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I've got names, words, proof. Todd, Lisa, they're treating folks like dirt. You need to hear this." Cassandra's voice crackled through, sharp with relief. "Mama, you're a genius. Send it over, I'll get the board moving." Evelyn grinned, a fierce little thing, and hung up, thinking she'd struck gold. She'd outsmarted them, stayed invisible while they bared their fangs. She leaned against the pillar, the cool concrete grounding her, and let herself breathe. Victory tasted sweet, even if it was just the first sip. She rolled her cart toward gate 16, ready to keep digging, when a shadow loomed over her, tall and broad, blocking the fluorescent light. She looked up, and there he was, Richard Callahan, the operations director, his face carved from stone and twice as cold. His suit was crisp, gray hair slicked back, and his eyes pinned her like a bug on a board. "Janitors don't snoop," he said, his voice low and oily, dripping with menace. Before she could blink, he snatched the notebook from her apron, his. fingers brushing her arm like a snake's tongue. She lunged, but he held it high, flipping through the pages with a sneer. "What's this, huh? Todd? Lisa? Jamal? You writing a damn novel?" He ripped the pages out, tearing them into confetti, and let them flutter to the floor. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs, her breath catching as she watched her work scatter. She opened her mouth to protest, but he stepped closer, his bulk crowding her against the cart. "Stay in your lane, old woman, or you'll wish you'd stuck to scrubbing toilets." He tossed the empty notebook at her feet and walked off, his polished shoes clicking on the tiles. She stood there, fists clenched, the air thick with his threat. She'd thought she was winning, thought she'd slipped under their radar, but Richard had seen her, marked her. She bent to scoop up the scraps, her knees aching, and shoved them into her pocket. The recorder, still hidden, had caught every word, his voice clear as a bell. She hadn't lost everything, not yet. But as she straightened, a chill snaked down her spine. Richard wasn't like Todd or Lisa, petty and loud. He was power, the kind that crushed you quiet. She'd poked a bear, and he'd swatted back harder than she'd expected. She glanced around, the terminal buzzing on, oblivious to the war brewing under its skin. Travelers rushed past, gate agents barked orders, but all she saw was Richard's back disappearing into the crowd, a predator stalking his turf. She'd underestimated this place, thought she could waltz in and out with a few names and a tape. Now she knew better. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a battlefield, and she'd just drawn first blood. She pushed her cart forward, the wheels squeaking louder now, a warning in every turn. She had to keep going, had to rebuild what he'd torn apart. But as she moved, a question gnawed at her. How far would Richard go to bury her? Hey folks, what do you think? Comment number 1, if you've ever seen someone like Todd get away with treating people like trash. Hit like if Evelyn's fights got you fired up, and subscribe to catch every twist coming your way. She thought she had the upper hand. But Richard's just flipped the table. What's he hiding that's worth tearing her down for? Stick around to find out. Evelyn Jackson shoved the shredded scraps of her notebook into her apron pocket, her fingers trembling as Richard Callahan's threat echoed in her skull. "Stay in your lane, old woman." His voice had been a blade, cold and precise, slicing through the fragile confidence she'd built over the past hour at Liberty Regional Airport. She stood by Gate 16, the terminal's chaos swirling around her like a storm she couldn't outrun, travelers dragging suitcases, announcements blaring about delayed flights to Atlanta. Her cart wobbled beside her, a dent in its frame from Todd's shove earlier, but she barely noticed. Richard had seen her, marked her, and torn her work to pieces. She'd thought she could slip through this place unnoticed, a ghost in a gray uniform, but he'd spotted her like a hawk circling. Prey. She took a breath, the air tasting of jet fuel and sweat, and patted her pocket. The recorder was still there, its tiny red light blinking through the fabric, a lifeline he hadn't found. She'd lost the notebook, sure, but his words were trapped, on tape, a noose she'd tighten later. She needed more, though, something to rebuild what he'd destroyed. She reached into her cart, past the mop and bleach, and pulled out a spare notebook, smaller, its cover stained with coffee rings. She'd come prepared for war, even if she hadn't known it'd start this fast. She flipped it open, her pen, scratching Todd's name again, then Lisa's, then Richard's, underlining his twice with a jagged line. She'd keep going, no matter how hard he pushed. She rolled her cart toward Gate 17, the wheels squeaking louder now, a protest against the weight of what she'd seen. She'd barely gone 10 feet when she caught a snippet of conversation, low and urgent, drifting from a cluster of staff near a coffee kiosk. She slowed, pretending to wipe a spill that didn't exist, her ears straining. Richard's voice cut through, smooth as oil but sharp as glass. "Keep an eye on that old black cleaner, she's trouble." He was on his phone, pacing, his gray suit catching the light like armor. "I don't care how, just watch her." Evelyn's stomach twisted, a knot of ice forming where her fire had been. He wasn't just warning her off, he was hunting her. She glanced around, the terminal's bustle suddenly menacing, every face a potential spy. She spotted a Latina janitor, small and wiry, sweeping near Gate 18. The woman's name tag read, Sophia, and her eyes flicked up, meeting Evelyn's, for a split second before darting away. Evelyn pushed her cart closer, keeping her movements slow, casual, like she was just doing her job. Sophia noticed, hesitated, then leaned in as Evelyn passed. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of a boarding call. "Richard's got a list. People he's fired for talking. You're on it now." Evelyn nodded, her throat dry, and muttered, "Thanks, hun." Sophia scurried off, her broom scraping the floor like a warning bell. Evelyn's mind raced. A list. She'd thought she could blend in, stay invisible, but Richard was already closing the net. She gripped the cart handle, her knuckles aching, and kept moving, her cap pulled low. She could do this, she told herself. She'd faced down worse in her nursing days, racist doctors barking orders while she stitched up their messes. She'd stay one step ahead, gather more, get it to Cassandra. She rolled past gate 19, the recorder humming, her new notebook tucked tight against her hip. She felt a flicker of hope, a belief she could outlast him, outsmart him. She was wrong. The trap sprang 10 minutes later, swift and brutal. She was mopping near gate 20, the floor slick with spilled soda, when Lisa, the smug gate agent from earlier, strutted over, her ponytail swinging like a whip. "Hey, you!" she snapped, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "Where's that passenger's wallet?" Evelyn froze, the mop dripping in her hands, her pulse kicking up. "What wallet?" she asked, keeping her tone flat, her eyes on the floor. Lisa smirked, crossing her arms. "Don't play dumb, Granny. Guy in a blue coat said he left it by the trash and now it's gone. You were right there." Evelyn's mind spun. She'd been nowhere near the trash, hadn't seen a blue coat. But Lisa's eyes gleamed with something darker than suspicion. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. Before she could answer, 2 security guards loomed up, their radios crackling, their boots heavy on the tiles. "Step back, ma'am," one said, a white guy with a buzz cut and a jaw like a brick. He grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the cart, while the other, a black man with tired eyes, started rifling through her supplies. Travelers gawked, phones out, filming the old black janitor pinned like a thief. "I didn't take anything," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the heat climbing her neck. "Check the cameras." The buzz-cut guard snorted. "Yeah, sure. We'll get right on that." His grip tightened, bruising her skin, and she bit back a wince. Lisa stood there, arms still crossed, her smirk widening into a grin. "Should have stayed in your lane," she said, echoing Richard's threat. Evelyn's heart pounded, her mind screaming, "Set up, set up, set up." She'd been careful, kept her hands clean, but they didn't care. They wanted her gone. The black guard pulled back from the cart, shaking his head. "Nothing here," he muttered, almost reluctant. Buzzcut glared at him, then at Evelyn, and finally let go, shoving her against the cart. "Lucky this time," he growled. "Next time you're out." They walked off, Lisa trailing behind, her laughter floating back like poison. Evelyn stood there, her arm throbbing, her breath ragged. She dodged it, barely. She leaned on the cart, the metal cool against her palms, and let out a shaky sigh. She'd survived, kept her cover, held onto the recorder. She could still fight. She straightened, ready to move on, thinking she'd slipped their grasp. Then, she saw him. Richard standing 50 feet away near gate 21, his arms folded, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her with those cold predator eyes. Her stomach dropped. He'd orchestrated. This, she knew it. The wallet, Lisa, the guards, all his doing. She'd thought she was safe, thought she'd outrun his first strike, but he was playing a longer game. She turned away, pushing her cart toward gate 22, her legs heavy, her mind racing. She'd escaped, sure, but at what cost? Richard wasn't just watching her now. He was tightening the screws, testing how much she could take before she broke. She glanced back and he was still there, a statue in a suit, his lips twitching into a faint smile. She shivered, the terminal's air suddenly frigid. She'd come here to expose them, to gather proof for Cassandra, but they were fighting back, and they weren't playing fair. She reached into her apron, her fingers brushing the recorder, its hum a faint comfort. She'd lost the first notebook, dodged a frame-up, but she still had this. She could rebuild, keep going. But as she rolled past Gate 22, a new fear clawed at her. If Richard could pull this off in broad daylight, what else was he capable of? She thought of Sophia's warning, the list, the people he'd crushed before her. She'd stepped into a machine and it was starting to grind. She wiped her hands on her apron, the rough fabric grounding her, and kept moving. She had to. Stopping wasn't an option, not with Cassandra counting on her, not with Todd and Lisa and Richard thinking they could bury her. She'd survived this round, but the next one would be worse. She could feel it in her bones, a storm brewing just out of sight. She glanced at the clock above Gate 22, its red digits ticking toward 4:15. The day was far from over, and Richard was far from done. She tightened her grip on the cart, her resolve hardening. Let him come. She'd be ready. Evelyn Jackson rolled her dented cart away from Gate 22, her arm still throbbing where the security guard's fingers had dug in. The sting of Lisa's accusation and Richard Callahan's smug stare burning hotter than the bruise. Liberty Regional Airport buzzed around her, a hive of travelers and staff oblivious to the war she'd stumbled into. The air was thick with the tang of spilled soda and jet exhaust. The floor beneath her boots slick from her own mop water, but she barely noticed. Her mind was a tangle of fury and focus, replaying the setup she'd just dodged. Lisa's lie about the wallet, the guards pinning her like a thief, Richard watching it all unfold with that predator's grin. She'd survived, kept her recorder, held her ground, but it felt like running through quicksand. Every step forward sank her deeper. She needed to regroup, get ahead of them. She slipped her hand into her apron, brushing the recorder's smooth edge, its hum a quiet promise. She had Richard's threat on tape, Todd's venom, Lisa's sneer. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. She needed to get it to Cassandra, her daughter, the CEO who'd begged her to root out this rot. She rolled her cart toward a quiet corner near Gate 23, a stretch of empty benches where the crowds thinned out. She pulled the burner phone from her pocket, its cracked screen glowing as she dialed. "Cass, it's me," she said, her voice a low rasp, the weight of the day pressing on her lungs. "I've got audio, names, proof. Todd's a bully, Lisa's a snake, and Richard, he's the head of it all. He's on to me, tried to frame me already." Cassandra's reply came, fast, sharp with urgency. "Mama, you're incredible. Send it now, I'll push it to the board tonight." Evelyn's lips twitched into a grim smile, the first real spark of hope she'd felt since stepping into this hellhole. "Check your email in 5, she said, hanging up. She crouched behind the cart, shielding the phone with her body, and attached the audio file, her fingers clumsy on the tiny keys. She hit send, the whoosh of the message cutting through the terminal's drone like a gunshot in her ears. She stood, her knees creaking, and let out a slow breath. She'd done it. Cassandra would take it from here, swing the axe, clean house. She pictured Richard's face when the suspensions hit, his smug mask cracking as his kingdom crumbled. She rolled her cart toward Gate 8, a busy stretch where passengers jostled for boarding passes, and let herself relax, just a fraction. She mopped the floor, the rhythm steadying her pulse, and watched the staff scramble. Word must have spread fast because Todd was barking orders louder than usual, his wiry frame darting between gates, and Lisa's ponytail whipped as she snapped at a passenger. They didn't know it was her, didn't see the old black janitor, as the spark lighting their fuse. She smiled, small and fierce, thinking she'd won this round. She'd slipped through their fingers, turned their hate into her weapon. She was wrong. The blow came 10 minutes later, swift and public, like a slap across the face. She was wiping down a bench near Gate 8, the wood sticky with some kid's juice, when a white passenger in a rumpled blazer stormed up, his face red as a beet. He towered over her, 6 feet of entitlement, and pointed at his polished loafer, now smeared with a glob of spit. "You missed a spot, lazy," he snarled, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. Before she could react, he hawked another wad, landing it square on her boot, the wet smack echoing in her ears. She froze, her mop dripping, her chest caving in. The terminal went quiet, a dozen heads turning, some smirking, some looking away. She opened her mouth, years of nursing grit ready to snap back, but a shadow fell across her, heavy and cold. Richard Callahan stepped in, his suit pristine, his gray hair gleaming under the lights. "What's this?" he said, his tone dripping with fake concern. "Provoking passengers now?" Evelyn's blood turned to ice. She saw it then, the glint in his eyes, the trap snapping shut. "I didn't," she started, but he cut her off, his voice rising for the crowd. "You're a liability, janitor. Suspended, no pay. Effective now." He nodded to the same buzz-cut security guard from before, who grabbed her arm again, harder this time, and yanked her toward the exit. Travelers whispered, phones flashed. Filming the old black woman dragged out like trash. She twisted, her boots squeaking on the tiles, but the guard's grip was iron. "Let go," she hissed, but he just smirked, hauling her past gate 7, 6, 5, the terminal blurring into a smear of faces and noise. She thought of the recorder, safe in her pocket, the email sent to Cassandra, and clung to that. She'd fight back. She'd win. They shoved her out the staff door, the humid southern air hitting her like a wall, and the guard slammed it shut, leaving her on the curb with nothing but her cart and her rage. She stood there, panting, her uniform clinging to her sweat-soaked skin, thinking it was over. She'd lost her footing, her cover, everything. She'd call Cassandra, figure out the next move. She turned to grab her cart, ready to limp home, and lick her wounds when she saw it. Richard inside, watching her through the glass, his lips curled into a slow, vicious smile. He reached into her cart, casual as you please, and pulled out a leather wallet, the one Lisa had accused her of stealing. He held it up, letting her see, then slipped it into his pocket and walked away. Evelyn's heart stopped. He'd planted it right there in front of her after she was gone. She sank to the curb, her legs giving out, the concrete biting into her thighs. She'd thought she'd won, thought she'd slipped their grasp with that email, but Richard had been waiting, playing her like a fiddle. The suspension wasn't the end, it was the setup. He'd framed her, turned her victory into a noose, and she hadn't seen it coming. She stared at the glass doors, her reflection warped and small, and felt the weight of it crash down. Todd's shove, Lisa's lie, Richard's threat, they were nothing compared to this. He'd taken her out, made her a thief in their eyes, and left her with nothing but a recorder and a daughter who might not even get the chance to fight. She thought of Cassandra, up in her office, trusting her to deliver, and her stomach twisted. She'd failed, hadn't she? She'd walked in, thinking she could outsmart them, but they'd outplayed her, turned her own moves against her. She pulled the recorder out, its hum mocking her now, and clutched it tight. She wasn't done. Not yet. She'd find a way back, get that wallet, prove it was a lie. But as she sat there, the sun dipping low over the parking lot, a new fear clawed at her. Richard wasn't just reacting, he was planning. He'd known she'd fight, known she'd run to Cassandra, and he'd been ready. She thought of Sophia's warning, the list, the people he'd crushed. She was on it now, and he wasn't stopping at suspension. She stood, slow and stiff, her boots scuffing the pavement. She had to move, had to think. She'd lost this round, lost her place inside, but she still had the tape, still had Cassandra. She'd come back swinging, harder, smarter. She glanced at the terminal, its lights glowing like a beast's eyes, and felt a chill despite the heat. Richard had drawn the line, and she'd crossed it. Now he'd come for her, and it'd be worse than a shove or a lie. She pushed her cart toward the shadows, her mind racing. She'd survived this barely, but the next hit would be a hammer. She could feel it coming, a storm she couldn't outrun. Evelyn Jackson stood on the curb outside Liberty Regional Airport, the humid southern dusk wrapping around her like a damp shroud, her gray uniform sticking to her skin as she gripped her dented cart. Richard Callahan's frame-up, planting that wallet after her suspension, had hit her like a freight train, shattering the fragile hope she'd clung to after sending the audio to Cassandra. She'd thought she'd won, thought she'd slipped their grasp, but he'd turned her victory, into ash, leaving her bruised and banished. The terminal loomed behind her, its glass doors reflecting the last streaks of sunlight, a beast licking its chops. She wasn't done, though. She couldn't be. Her daughter was counting on her, and that recorder, still humming in her pocket, was her last weapon. She needed back in, needed to fight. She rummaged through her cart, past the mop and bleach, and found a stolen staff badge she'd swiped from a break room locker days ago, its edges worn, the name faded to a blur. It'd get her through the side entrance, past the guards who'd tossed her out. She squared her shoulders, the ache in her arm from the buzz-cut guard's grip pulsing with every move, and slipped into the shadows of the parking lot. She had to move fast before Richard tightened his net further. She swiped the badge at a rusted staff door near the baggage claim, the lock clicking open with a groan. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the rumble of conveyor belts and the sharp tang of oil. She rolled her cart through the dim corridors, her boots silent on the concrete, her cap pulled low. She needed more evidence, something to bury Richard, not just scratch him. She headed toward the operations office, a squat room tucked behind Gate 10, where she'd seen him barking orders earlier. She parked her cart outside, pretending to scrub a scuff mark, and listened. His voice drifted through the cracked door, low and clipped. "Pay the cop $500. Make her file disappear," he said, his tone casual like he was ordering lunch. Evelyn's breath caught, her hand sliding to the recorder. She pressed it closer, catching every word as he added, "She's a nobody, just some old cleaner sticking her nose where it don't belong." She grinned, fierce and fleeting, the tape spinning gold. This was it, proof he was dirty, not just cruel. She was about to slip away when a shadow moved behind her, broad and quiet. She turned, heart lurching, to see Jamal, the black baggage handler, his orange vest glowing in the dim light. His eyes widened, recognition flashing. "You're back?" he whispered, stunned. She nodded, quick and sharp. "Caught him bribing a cop. Help me get this to Cassandra." Jamal hesitated, then set his jaw. "I'm in," he said, his voice low but firm. She handed him the recorder, her trust a gamble, but he was the only ally she had left. He tucked it into his vest, promising to run it upstairs. She felt a surge of relief, thinking she'd turned the tide. Richard didn't know she was here, didn't know she'd struck back. She'd won this round, she was sure. She was wrong. The hammer fell 20 minutes later, brutal and swift. She'd moved to a storage room near Gate 11, hiding among stacks of broken chairs and dusty bins, waiting for Jamal to return. The door slammed open, and 3 men stormed in, their faces shadowed but their intent clear. Richard's goons, not staff, not guards, but hired muscle, their knuckles scarred, their boots heavy. "Found you," one growled, a white guy with a shaved head and a tattoo curling up his neck. Before she could scream, he grabbed her, slamming her against a metal shelf, the clang ringing in her ears. Pain exploded in her ribs as another, a stocky man with a buzz cut, drove a fist into her side. She gasped, her knees buckling, but they held her up, pinning her arms. The third, lean and silent, yanked the recorder from her pocket and smashed it under his heel, the plastic splintering like her hope. "Quit, or next time's worse," the tattooed one hissed, his breath hot on her face. They hit her again, a boot to her thigh, a fist to her jaw, and she tasted blood, coppery and sharp. She crumpled as they let go, her body a heap on the cold floor, the cart toppling beside her with a crash. They left her there, the door banging shut. The silence, swallowing her groans. She lay still, her chest heaving, every breath a knife in her lungs. She'd thought she was safe, thought Jamal would get the tape out, but Richard had eyes everywhere. She dragged herself up, her hands shaking, her face swelling where the fist had landed. She'd lost the recorder, lost her edge, but she wasn't dead. She stumbled to the door, leaning on the wall, thinking she'd hit bottom. She hadn't. She limped into the corridor, her vision blurry, and froze. A poster stared back at her, taped to the wall, her face in grainy black and white, the word "wanted" screaming above it. "Theft suspect, Evelyn Jackson, last seen. Near Gate 10, it read, her janitor's uniform unmistakable. Her stomach dropped, a sick lurch that nearly sent her to her knees again. Richard hadn't just beaten her, he'd branded her, turned her into a criminal for the whole airport to hunt. She ripped the poster down, crumpling it in her fist, but more lined the hall, a dozen pairs of her own eyes staring back. She'd thought she could fight, thought she could outsmart him, but he'd crushed her move and raised the stakes to a level she couldn't match. She sank against the wall, her bruised thigh screaming, her mind racing. Jamal had the tape, but would he make it? She'd trusted him, but Richard's reach was long, his claws deep. She thought of Cassandra, waiting for proof that might never come, and her heart twisted. She'd walked in here to save her daughter's airport, but now she was the prey, bleeding and hunted. She pushed off the wall, her boots scuffing the floor, and staggered toward the exit. She had to get out, regroup, find a way back. The terminals faded as she moved, the corridors a maze of shadows and echoes. She'd lost everything in that storage room, her recorder, her safety, her invisibility. Richard had unleashed hell, and she'd felt every blow. She reached the staff door, the same one she'd snuck through, and slipped outside, the night air hitting her swollen face like a slap. She leaned on her cart, its wheels grinding against the pavement, and caught her breath. She wasn't done. Not yet. She'd crawl back, find Jamal, get to Cassandra. But as she hobbled into the darkness, a new fear gripped her. Richard wasn't playing defense anymore. He was on the attack, and he wouldn't stop at bruises. She thought of the poster, her face plastered everywhere, and shivered. He'd made her a target, and the next hit would be lethal. Hey folks, what's your take on this? Comment number 1 if you think Evelyn's grit is unbreakable. Hit like if Richard's dirty tricks have you raging, and subscribe to see how she claws her way out. She's down, bloodied and hunted, but she's not out. What's Richard got up his sleeve to finish her off? Stay tuned to find out. Evelyn Jackson limped through the shadows of Liberty Regional Airport's parking lot, her bruised body screaming with every step, the night air thick and sticky against her swollen jaw. The beating in the storage room had left her reeling, her ribs aching, her thigh pulsing where Richard Callahan's goons had landed their boot. The smashed recorder was gone, her face plastered on wanted posters, branding her a thief for all to see. She'd slipped out, barely, but she wasn't safe. Not yet. She clung to one thread of hope. Jamal, the young black baggage handler who'd taken her backup tape to Cassandra. She'd trusted him, handed over her last weapon, and now she needed him to come through. She sank onto a bench near the employee lot, her dented cart creaking beside her, its wheels gummed with dirt from her escape. Her hands shook as she wiped blood from her lip, the copper taste lingering, a reminder of how close she'd come to breaking. She had to find Jamal. Had to know the tape had reached her daughter, the CEO who could turn this nightmare around. She pulled her cap lower, hiding her swollen face, and scanned the lot. Headlights flashed as staff trickled out, their shifts ending, their laughter floating on the breeze. She spotted him then, his orange vest catching the glow of a street lamp, his broad frame hunched as he trudged toward a rusted pickup. "Jamal," she hissed, her voice a raw scrape. He froze, head whipping around, eyes wide with panic. He jogged over, crouching beside her, his breath fast. "You're alive," he said, relief cracking his voice. "I got it to Cassandra. Dropped it in her office mail slot. She'll hear it all." Evelyn's chest loosened, a flood of gratitude, washing over the pain. "You're a godsend," she whispered, gripping his arm. He nodded, quick and sharp, then helped her stand, his strength steadying her wobble. She pictured Cassandra listening to Richard's bribe, the board mobilizing, suspensions raining down. She'd done it, turned the tide, even after the beating, the frame-up. She leaned on Jamal, thinking they'd won this round, that Richard's empire was cracking. She was wrong. The blow came fast, a thunderclap in the quiet lot. A security truck roared up, tires squealing, its lights blinding them. 2 guards leapt out, the buzz-cut brute from before and a new face, a wiry white guy with a sneer. "Jamal Carter," Buzzcut barked. "You're fired. Assaulted a passenger. Says right here." He waved a clipboard, the paper fluttering, like a death warrant. Jamal stepped back, hands up, his voice trembling. "What? I didn't touch nobody," Evelyn's stomach dropped, her bruised ribs tightening. She saw Richard's hand in this, his cold grin from the terminal flashing in her mind. Before she could speak, a squad car screeched in, red and blue lights painting the lot, and 2 cops stormed out, cuffs gleaming. "Hands behind your back," one snapped, a beefy white officer with a buzzed head, his partner hovering with a hand on his gun. Jamal shook his head, pleading, "This ain't right. I swear." The cuffs clicked, metal biting his wrists, and they shoved him toward the car, his vest snagging on the door. Evelyn lunged, her voice cracking. "He's innocent, you can't!" Buzzcut spun on her, his fist raised, but the wiry guard grabbed her, pinning her against the bench, her bruised jaw slamming wood. "Stay out of it, hag," he growled, his breath sour with chew. She twisted, helpless. As the cop car peeled out, Jamal's face pressed to the glass, eyes locked on hers, wide with fear. The guards stalked off, their truck rumbling away, leaving her alone, panting, the bench digging into her spine. She sank down, her hands clawing her hair, guilt crashing over her like a wave. She'd dragged Jamal into this, trusted him with her fight, and now he was gone, locked up for a lie. She thought of his quiet nod by gate 12, his soft, rough day, huh? He'd been her anchor, and she'd let him sink. She pounded the bench, her knuckles splitting, the pain a dull echo of her ribs. She'd thought they'd won, thought the tape would save them, but Richard had struck back harder, faster. She staggered to her feet, her legs jelly, and hobbled toward her cart, her mind spinning. She had to fix this, get to Cassandra, free Jamal. She was halfway across the lot when a passenger, a white woman in a floral dress, stepped from a taxi, her voice shrill. "That's him, the one who hit me." She pointed at the empty space where Jamal had stood, her eyes darting to Evelyn, then away. Evelyn froze, the pieces clicking. Richard had paid her, staged it, turned Jamal into a scapegoat to bury her. Deeper. She clenched her fists, her nails biting her palms, and kept moving, the woman's voice fading behind her. She reached a payphone by the lot's edge, its plastic cracked, and dialed Cassandra, her coins clinking like gunfire. "Cass?" "It's me," she rasped, her throat raw. "Jamal's arrested. Richard framed him, assault charge." "The tape's with you, use it." Cassandra's voice shook, fury lacing every word. "I've got it, Mama, I'm on it. Stay safe." Evelyn hung up, her breath hitching, thinking she'd salvaged something, that Cassandra could fight now. She turned, ready to vanish into the night, when a glint caught her eye. A security camera above the payphone, its lens fixed on her. Her heart sank, a sick thud in her chest. She stumbled back, her cap slipping, and saw Richard on the terminal's steps, 100 yards off, his phone pressed to his ear, his grin a slash of white in the dark. He'd tapped Cassandra's office, she realized, her blood turning to ice. He'd heard it all, the drop-off, her call, every move. She'd thought she'd slipped his grasp, thought Jamal's sacrifice had bought her time, but Richard was ahead, always ahead. She grabbed her cart, its wheels grinding, and lurched toward the shadows, her swollen jaw throbbing with every step. She'd lost Jamal, lost the upper hand, and now Richard knew her next play. She thought of his goons, the beating, the posters, and shivered, the night air suddenly frigid. He wasn't just crushing her, he was dismantling her piece by piece, ally by ally. She ducked behind a dumpster, her breath ragged, her mind racing. She had to warn Cassandra, had to get Jamal out, but how? She'd walked into this to save her daughter's airport, but now she was bleeding, hunted, and dragging others down with her. She thought of the tape, Richard's voice bragging about the bribe, and clung to it. It was still out there, still a weapon, if Cassandra could use it fast enough. She peeked out, the terminal's lights flickering like a predator's eyes, and felt the weight of her choice. She'd trusted Jamal, leaned on him, and he'd paid for it. She wouldn't let it be for nothing. She straightened, slow and stiff, her boots scuffing the asphalt. She'd fight back, find a way. But as she moved, a new dread settled in her gut. Richard had ears everywhere, and he wasn't done. She glanced at the payphone, its camera staring down, and knew the next hit would be worse. She'd lost her ally, lost her footing, but not her fire. She pushed her cart deeper into the dark, her resolve hardening. Let him come. She'd be ready even if it killed her. Evelyn Jackson crouched behind the dumpster in Liberty Regional Airport's employee lot, her bruised body pressed against the rusted metal, the stench of rotting food and oil clogging her throat. The night was thick, the southern humidity plastering, her gray uniform to her skin, her swollen jaw pulsing with every shallow breath. Jamal's arrest still clawed at her gut, his pleading eyes burned into her memory as the cops dragged him away, framed by Richard Callahan's lie. She'd trusted him with her backup tape, thought it'd reach Cassandra and turn the tide, but Richard had outplayed her again, tapping her daughter's office, hearing every desperate word. She was battered, hunted, her face on wanted posters, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. She had to fight, had to make Jamal's sacrifice count. She gripped her dented cart, its wheels grinding against the asphalt, and slipped toward a payphone 2 blocks from the airport, its flickering light a beacon in the dark. She couldn't go home, couldn't risk Richard's goons finding her there. She needed help, someone outside his reach. She dialed a local reporter, Marcus Tate, a scrappy black journalist she'd met years ago at a hospital fundraiser, his card still tucked in her wallet. "Marcus, it's Evelyn Jackson," she rasped, her voice a cracked whisper. "I've got audio, airport corruption, racism, Richard Callahan's voice bribing a cop. Meet me now." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Corner of Pine and 5th, 20 minutes, he said, his tone sharp with hunger. She hung up, her coins clinking, and hobbled to the spot, her thighs screaming from the beating. Marcus pulled up in a beat-up sedan, his wiry frame hunched over the wheel, his glasses glinting as he waved her in. She handed him a USB, a copy, of the tape she'd made before giving the original to Jamal, her hands trembling. "Get it out there," she said. "Let the world hear." He nodded, peeling off into the night, and she sank against a lamppost, her chest heaving. She'd done it, struck back, turned Richard's words into a weapon. By morning, the story broke, a firestorm online. "Liberty Airport exec caught in bribery scandal," the headline screamed. Richard's name trending, the audio looping on every news site. She watched from a diner across town, nursing a coffee, her cap pulled low, the TV above the counter blaring Marcus's voice. "This janitor's tape exposes a culture of hate," he said, and Evelyn grinned, fierce and fleeting. Crowds gathered, outside the airport chanting her name, signs waving, "Justice for Evelyn." She'd won, she thought, sipping the bitter brew, her swollen jaw aching less under the glow of victory. She'd cracked Richard's armor, let the world see his filth. She was wrong. The backlash hit like a tidal wave, public and vicious. She stepped outside the diner, the morning sun harsh on her bruised face, and saw it unfold. A news van screeched up, a white anchor leaping out, her mic thrust forward. "Evelyn Jackson, right? The janitor?" Before she could answer, a pickup roared past, a white guy in a baseball cap leaning out, hurling a soda can that smashed against her shoulder, sticky liquid soaking her uniform. "Thieving liar!" he yelled, and the crowd turned, head swiveling, eyes narrowing. She stumbled back, her heart racing, as more joined in. Passengers from the airport, staff she'd never met, their voices a chorus of hate. "Caught her! Stealing on tape!" one shouted, a woman with a stroller, her face twisted. "Dirty crook!" another spat, a man in a suit, lobbing a half-eaten burger that splattered on her boots. Evelyn's stomach churned, her mind spinning. She'd exposed Richard, but something was wrong, horribly wrong. She ducked into an alley, her breath hitching, and saw a TV through a shop window. Richard's face filled the screen, his suit crisp, his voice smooth. "This woman's a fraud," he said, holding up grainy footage, her hands near a trash can, the wallet flashing in her grip. It was doctored, a lie stitched together from her mopping, but it looked real, damning. The crowd outside the airport roared, pelting her posters with trash, slurs echoing, "Go back where you came from." She sank against the alley wall, her legs buckling, the burger's grease staining her fingers as she wiped her boots. She'd thought she'd won. Thought. The truth would shield her, but Richard had flipped it, turned her into the villain. She crawled to a payphone, her body screaming, and dialed Cassandra. Cass, they've turned on me, she croaked, her voice breaking. Richard's got fake video. I'm done. Cassandra's reply was a lifeline, fierce and fast. Mama, I'm coming. Stay put. Evelyn hung up thinking she'd hold on, that her daughter could pull her out. She was wrong again. Sirens wailed close and sharp, and 2 cop cars screeched into the alley, their lights blinding her. Evelyn Jackson, you're under arrest, a white officer barked, his hand on his gun, his partner cuffing her wrists, the metal biting her bruised skin. Inciting a riot, he added, shoving her into the car, her head banging the frame. She twisted, her swollen jaw throbbing as they sped toward the station, the crowd's jeers fading into the hum of the engine. She thought she'd escaped Richard's frame-up, thought the tape would save her, but he'd spun it into a noose, tighter than ever. She slumped in the back seat, her reflection in the window a ghost of bruises and defeat, when the radio crackled, a news update cutting through. Richard Callahan addresses airport scandal, the anchor said, and his voice oozed out, calm and smug. We're cooperating fully, but this woman's actions endangered our staff and passengers. She clenched her fists, the cuffs cutting deeper, and saw his grin in her mind, that same slash of white from the terminal. He was on TV, spinning lies, while she was cuffed, her name a curse on every tongue. The car jolted to a stop at the station, the cops yanking her out, her boots dragging on the pavement. She thought of Jamal, locked up for her fight, and Cassandra racing to save her. She'd lit a match, sure, but Richard had doused it in gasoline, burning her world down. She stumbled into the holding cell, the door clanging shut, the concrete cold against her back. She'd exposed him, made him bleed, but he'd turned the crowd, the law, everything against her. She sat there, her breath shallow, her mind racing. She'd lost the public, lost her freedom, but not her daughter. Cassandra would come. She had to. She thought of the tape, Marcus's story, the chance outside, and clung to a shred of hope. Richard had won this round, turned her victory into a public flogging, but she wasn't finished. She'd crawl out, fight back, prove the video was fake. But as she leaned against the cell wall, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a new terror gripped her. Richard wasn't just crushing her. He was rewriting her, making her the monster. She thought of the alley, the trash, the slurs, and shivered, the cold seeping into her bones. He'd taken her voice, her name, and left her caged. She heard footsteps, heavy and slow and tensed, expecting more guards. The door creaked, but no one came. She was alone for now. She had to get out, had to warn Cassandra, but how? She'd walked into this to save the airport, but now she was the hunted, and Richard was the hunter, his next move lurking just out of sight. She closed her eyes, her swollen jaw throbbing, and steeled herself. Let him come. She'd be ready, even from a cage. Evelyn Jackson sat on the cold concrete bench of her holding cell, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry wasps, her swollen jaw throbbing in time with her pulse. The cuffs had left red welts on her wrists, her gray uniform, still damp with soda from the crowd's assault, the sting of Richard Callahan's public humiliation burning deeper than the bruises from his goons. She'd exposed him, leaked his bribery audio to Marcus Tate, watched it spark outrage, only for him to flip it with doctored footage, branding her a thief and a rioter. The cell door clanged and she tensed, expecting more guards. But it was Cassandra, her daughter, storming in, navy blazer crisp, eyes blazing with fury. "Mama, I've got you out," she said, her voice a lifeline, sharp and steady. Bales posted, boards moving on the tape. Evelyn stood, her legs wobbly, and gripped Cassandra's arm, the warmth of her daughter's strength pulling her from the abyss. "He's got fake video, Cass," she rasped, her throat raw. "Turned everyone against me." Cassandra's jaw tightened, a mirror of Evelyn's own grit. "We'll counter it, I promise. I've got the boardroom locked down." Evelyn nodded, leaning on her as they shuffled out, the station's stale air giving way to the humid night. She thought of Jamal, locked up for her fight, and the tape, her last weapon, now in Cassandra's hands. She'd lost everything, her cover, her freedom, but her daughter was her rock, her way back. They climbed into Cassandra's sleek sedan, the engine purring as they sped toward the airport. Evelyn's bruised ribs aching with every bump. She trusted Cassandra's boardroom savvy, her ability to wield power where Evelyn wielded grit. She let her eyes close just for a moment, the hum of the car lulling her into a fragile peace. She'd rest, regroup, let Cassandra strike. She was wrong. The betrayal hit like a knife in the dark, swift and deep. They reached Liberty Regional Airport at dawn, the terminal's lights glowing through a haze of fog, the parking lot eerily quiet. Cassandra led her to the executive suite, a glass-walled fortress on the top floor, where the board waited. Evelyn sank into a leather chair, her body screaming as Cassandra briefed her. "We've got the tape, Mama. Richard suspended pending review. You're safe here." Evelyn exhaled, a shaky breath, thinking they'd turned the corner. She pictured Richard's smug face cracking, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own voice. She was about to speak when the door swung open, and Claire Hensley stepped in. A white woman in her 50s, board member, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her smile thin as a razor. "Evelyn, glad you're okay," she said, her tone syrupy, too smooth. Evelyn nodded, wary, her nurse's instincts prickling. Claire had always been Cassandra's ally, a steady vote in tense meetings. She trusted her, leaned on her daughter's judgment. Then it unraveled. Claire's phone buzzed and she glanced at it, her smile twitching. Minutes later, Richard stormed in, his gray suit rumpled, his eyes wild with triumph. "Cassandra Jackson, you're suspended," he barked, slamming a folder on the table, papers spilling. "Familial bias, conflict of interest, per board vote." Evelyn's heart stopped, her bruised hands gripping the chair. Cassandra leapt up, her voice a whip. "What vote? This is my airport." Richard smirked, nodding to Claire, who stood, her hands clasped. "I called it, dear," she said, her voice ice. "You're too close to this mess." Evelyn's mind reeled, the room tilting. Claire had betrayed them, sold them out. She thought of the tape, the suspensions, and realized it was a trap, a play to oust Cassandra while she was down. She staggered to her feet, her voice raw. "You snake, Claire, after all Cass did for you?" Claire didn't flinch, just shrugged, her eyes sliding to Richard. "Business, Evelyn, nothing personal." Richard loomed over them, his grin a slash of venom. "You're done, both of you. Out by noon." Security swarmed in, 2 new guards, their hands rough as they grabbed Cassandra, dragging her toward the door. Evelyn lunged, her bruised ribs screaming, but a guard shoved her back. Her head cracking against the table, she slumped, dazed, as Cassandra shouted, "Mama, I'll fix this." The door slammed, leaving Evelyn alone with Richard and Claire, the air thick with betrayal. She thought it was over, thought they'd hit bottom, but Richard wasn't done. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking, and tossed a baggie onto the table, white powder glinting inside. "Found this in your cart," he said, his voice low, mocking. Evelyn's blood froze, her swollen jaw dropping. She'd never touched drugs, never seen that bag, but Claire nodded, her smile widening. "Planted it myself," she whispered, leaning in. "Richard pays better than loyalty." Evelyn's chest caved, her breath a ragged gasp. They'd framed her again, deeper, darker, a lie to bury her for good. She scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking, thinking she'd fight, scream, anything, but Richard grabbed her arm, his grip iron, and shoved her toward the window. "Look out there," he hissed, forcing her to see the crowd below, still chanting, still hating, her name a curse on their lips. "You're nothing now." He let go, and she stumbled, her bruised thigh buckling, the baggie staring up from the table like a death sentence. She'd trusted Cassandra, trusted Claire, thought they'd win. But Richard had turned her daughter's ally into a dagger, stabbed them both in the back. She sank into the chair, her mind racing, her body a wreck. She'd lost the board, lost Cassandra's power, and now this, a frame-up to seal her fate. She thought of Jamal cuffed for her, and Cassandra dragged out, and felt the weight crush her. She'd walked in to save this place, but now she was the hunted, betrayed from within. She stared at Claire, her silver hair glinting, and saw the truth. Richard had bought her, turned her, and she'd sold them out for a paycheck. Evelyn's hands clenched, her nails biting her palms, a flicker of fire still burning. She wasn't done, not yet. She'd get out, warn Cassandra, expose Claire. But as she sat there, the room silent, the baggie mocking her, a new dread sank in. Richard had the board, the crowd, the law, and now this lie. She thought of the tape, her last hope, and prayed Cassandra could still use it. She had to, or they were finished. Hey folks, what's your read on this twist? Comment number 1 if you think Claire's betrayal cuts deeper than Richard's fists. Hit like if Evelyn's fight has you rooting for her comeback, and subscribe to catch every gut punch coming next. She's lost her daughter's throne, and gained a frame-up, but she's still breathing. How far will Richard go to bury her now that he's got the board in his pocket? Stick around to see the fallout. Evelyn Jackson slumped in the leather chair of Liberty Regional Airport's executive suite, her bruised body a map of pain, her swollen jaw throbbing under the harsh glare of the overhead lights. The baggie of white powder Claire had planted sat on the table, a silent accusation, while Richard Callahan's polished shoes clicked away, his smug exit leaving a void of dread. Claire's betrayal had gutted her, stripping Cassandra of her CEO title, turning an ally into a knife for Richard's hand. The guards had dragged her daughter out, leaving Evelyn alone, framed again, the crowd's hate still echoing from below. She staggered to her feet, her bruised ribs screaming, and grabbed the baggie, shoving it into her apron pocket. She couldn't leave it here, couldn't let it stick. She had to move, had to fight, even if her legs felt like wet sand. She slipped out the suite's back door, her dented cart abandoned, and hobbled down a service stairwell, the concrete steps jarring her battered thigh. She needed to vanish, regroup, find a way to warn Cassandra. She reached the ground floor, the terminal's hum muffled through the walls, and pulled a wig from her bag, a cheap black bob she'd stashed for emergencies. She yanked it on, her cap stuffed in her pocket, and swiped a fake ID from a lost and found bin she'd scoped days ago, the name Marla Evans blurring under her thumb. She was a ghost now, not Evelyn Jackson, not the janitor, just a shadow, slipping through the cracks. She shuffled into the terminal, head down, blending with the early morning travelers, their suitcases rattling like a drumline. She had to get to Marcus Tate, the reporter, push more evidence, keep the fire burning. She spotted a staff meeting near Gate 14, a huddle of orange vests and clipboards, Richard's voice booming over the chatter. She edged closer, her wig itching, and crouched behind a kiosk, pretending to tie her boot. "We're purging the week," he bragged, his gray hair glinting under the lights, his suit crisp despite the chaos he'd sown. No room for complainers, no room for troublemakers. She pulled a spare recorder from her sock, a tiny thing she'd kept as a backup, and hit record, her hands steady despite the ache in her knuckles. He named names, Todd, Lisa, others she'd marked, praising their loyalty, mocking the old hag who dared defy him. She grinned, a fierce slash across her swollen face, and slipped the recorder back into her sock. She had him again, his arrogance on tape, a new weapon to wield. She limped to a payphone near Gate 15, her coins clinking, and dialed Marcus. "It's me," she whispered, her voice a gravelly thread. "Got more," Richard boasting, naming his crew. "Meet me at the diner now." Marcus's reply was quick, eager. "On my way." She hung up, thinking she'd struck gold, that this would reignite the fight. She hobbled out, catching a bus across town, her fake ID clutched tight, and met Marcus at the diner, the same one where she'd watched her first victory unfold. She handed him the tape, her bruised fingers trembling, and he ran it, his eyes lighting up. "This is dynamite," he said, racing off to break the story. By noon, the airwaves erupted. Liberty exec brags about purge. Protests swelling outside the airport, signs waving. Evelyn was right. She watched from a showy park bench, her wig slipping, her chest heaving with pride. She'd won, she thought, her battered body leaning into the wood, the sun warming her bruises. She'd turned Richard's gloating into a noose, given Cassandra a lifeline. She was wrong. The hammer fell at dusk, a blow that shook the earth beneath her. She was sipping water, her throat raw, when sirens screamed, a dozen cop cars converging on the airport, lights flashing like a war zone. The TV in a nearby shop blared. Bomb threat at Liberty Regional, suspect Evelyn Jackson. Her cup slipped, shattering on the pavement, her heart slamming against her ribs. She stumbled to the screen, her wig askew, and saw Richard's face, calm and grave, addressing a press swarm. "We've locked down the facility," he said, his voice steady. "This woman's a danger. A terrorist." She gasped, her bruised, hands clawing her hair, the lie so big it choked her. She'd recorded him, exposed him, but he'd spun it into this, a frame-up to end all frame-ups. Protesters scattered, replaced by SWAT teams, their rifles glinting as they stormed the terminal. She ran, her battered thighs screaming, ducking into an alley as choppers buzzed overhead, their spotlights slicing the dusk. She'd thought she was safe, thought the tape would shield her, but Richard had turned her into a monster, a threat to thousands. She hid behind a trash bin, her breath ragged, when boots thundered close, SWAT closing in. "Marla Evans, drop your weapon." "They," shouted, mistaking her ID, their guns trained on her shadow. She bolted, her wig flying off, her fake ID slipping from her grip, and darted through a maze of back streets, her lungs burning, her ribs cracking with every step. She dove into a storm drain, the dank water soaking her uniform, and crawled, her bruised hands scraping concrete until the sirens faded. She emerged in a vacant lot, her body a wreck, thinking she'd escaped, that she'd lived to fight. Then she smelled smoke, sharp and acrid, drifting from the east. She staggered to her feet, her eyes tracing the plume, and saw it, Cassandra's house, 3 miles off, engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking the sky. Her knees buckled, a scream tearing from her throat, raw and wild. Richard had torched it, retaliation for her tape, a message carved in fire. She sank to the dirt, her swollen jaw trembling, her mind shattering. She'd thought she'd won, thought she'd outsmarted him, but he'd burned her daughter's home, turned her victory to ash. She thought of Cassandra, out there, fighting, and Jamal, locked up, and felt the weight crush her. She'd walked in to save this airport, but now she was a fugitive, her name a curse, her family's life in ruins. She clawed the dirt, her nails splitting, and pulled the recorder from her sock, its hum a faint pulse. She had proof still, but at what cost? She thought of the SWAT, the fire, and shivered, the night closing in. Richard wasn't just crushing her. He was erasing her piece by piece, home by home. She staggered up, her boots sinking in mud, and stumbled toward the city's edge, her resolve flickering. She had to find Cassandra, had to warn her, but how? She'd lost everything, her cover, her allies, her daughter's house, and now this. A bomb threat lie pinning her as a terrorist. She glanced back, the airport's lights a distant glow, and felt the dread sink deeper. Richard had the world, believing her a monster, and he wasn't done. She thought of the tape, Marcus's story, the protests, and clung to a shred of hope. She wasn't dead, not yet. She'd crawl back, fight back. But as she moved, a new terror gripped her. He'd burned Cassandra's house. What would he burn next? She pushed forward, her battered body a testament to her will. The recorder her last lifeline. Let him come. She'd be ready, even from the ashes. Evelyn Jackson stumbled through the vacant lot, her battered body sinking into the mud, the distant roar of flames from Cassandra's burning house clawing at her soul. The night was a shroud, heavy with smoke and the echo of sirens, her swollen jaw trembling as she clutched the tiny recorder, its hum a lifeline in her sock. Richard Callahan had framed her as a terrorist, locked down Liberty Regional Airport with a fake bomb threat, and torched her daughter's home, all to bury her last tape exposing his purge. She'd hit rock bottom, a fugitive in a soaked uniform, her allies gone, her name a curse, but she wasn't finished. Rage fueled her, a fire hotter than the one she'd fled, and she dragged herself up, her bruised ribs grinding with every breath. She had to fight, had to make him pay. She thought of Jamal, cuffed for her, and Cassandra out there, vulnerable. She couldn't stop, not now. She limped to a gas station 3 blocks away, its neon sign flickering, and slipped into the bathroom, the stench of bleach stinging her nose. She splashed water on her face, wincing as it hit her bruises, and pulled a burner phone from her pocket, her last spare, its plastic chipped from the beating. She dialed Jamal's cousin, a tech whiz she'd met at a church picnic years back, a skinny kid named Terrell who'd bragged about hacking school servers. "Terrell, it's Evelyn," she rasped, her voice a broken thread. "Jamal's locked up, I need you. Meet me, old mill lot, now." He paused, then agreed, his voice tight. She hung up, her coins clinking, and hobbled to the spot, a crumbling ruin of brick and weeds, her boots crunching gravel. Terrell pulled up in a rattling hatchback, his lanky frame hunched, eyes darting. "Heard about Jamal," he said, handing her a laptop, its screen glowing. "What's the play?" She grinned, fierce and jagged, and pulled the recorder. "Hack Richard's email, get this out." Terrell cracked his knuckles, plugged in the tape, and worked, his fingers flying as she paced, her battered thigh pulsing. Within an hour, he'd breached Richard's private server, a treasure trove of filth, emails to cops, city council, staff, all dripping with bribes and threats. "Send it," she said, her voice steel. And he did, blasting it to Marcus Tate, the governor's office, every news outlet in the state. She leaned against the car, her chest heaving, thinking she'd won, that this would bury him. By dawn, the story exploded. Liberty exec's bribery network exposed, headlines screaming, protests roaring louder, the governor calling an audit. She watched from a pawnshop TV, her wig gone, her bruised face bare, and felt a surge of triumph, raw and wild. She'd struck back, turned his secrets into shackles, given Cassandra a sword. She was wrong. The retaliation came at noon, a blow that shook her core. She was hiding in a motel, its walls peeling, the TV blaring Marcus's voice, when Terrell burst in, his face pale. "They got Sophia," he said, his voice cracking. Evelyn's heart stopped, her bruised hands clenching. Sophia, the Latina janitor, who'd warned her about Richard's list, her small frame a quiet ally. "Kidnapped," Terrell added, showing a grainy photo, Sophia gagged, tied to a chair, a note pinned to her chest. "Give up the evidence, or she's gone." Evelyn's knees buckled, her swollen jaw trembling, guilt crashing over her like a flood. She dragged Sophia into this just like Jamal, and now Richard had her, a pawn to break her. She sank onto the bed, its springs groaning, and stared at the photo, Sophia's eyes wide with terror. She thought of the tape, the emails, her victory, and felt it sour. She couldn't let Sophia die, couldn't lose another. She grabbed the burner, dialed a number Terrell had pulled from Richard's email, a burner of his own, and rasped, "You win, I'll trade. Motel 6, room 12 now." She hung up, her breath hitching, and told Terrell to run, shoving him out. She waited, the clock ticking, her bruised ribs aching, until tires screeched outside. Richard's goons stormed in, the tattooed thug, from the storage room leading, his scarred knuckles flexing. "Where's the tape?" he growled, his boot tapping her cart, abandoned in the corner. She handed over the recorder, her hands steady, and he smirked, grabbing it. "Sophia's free," he said, tossing a phone with a live feed, Sophia stumbling into a parking lot, alive. Evelyn exhaled, relief flooding her, thinking she'd saved her, that she'd bought time. She was wrong again. The thug didn't leave. He pulled a lighter, flicked it, and torched the recorder, the plastic melting, her evidence curling into smoke. "Richard says hi," he sneered, and walked out, leaving her in the haze. She coughed, her bruised lungs burning, and sank to the floor, thinking it was over, that she'd lost it all. Then the TV flickered, a news alert cutting through. Evelyn Jackson wanted for kidnapping. Statewide manhunt launched. Her blood froze, her swollen jaw dropping. Richard had framed her for Sophia's abduction, twisted her sacrifice into a new noose, tighter than the bomb threat, darker than the drugs. She staggered up, her battered thigh screaming, and peered out the window. Cop cars swarming the lot, lights flashing, voices shouting her name. She'd thought she'd saved Sophia, thought she'd held the line, but Richard had burned her evidence and pinned her as the monster, again. She grabbed her bag, her fake ID gone, her wig lost, and slipped out the back, her boots splashing in puddles, the sirens closing in. She ran, her bruised ribs cracking, her mind racing. She'd exposed his network, sparked an audit, but he'd countered with fire and lies, taking Sophia, her evidence, her freedom. She thought of Cassandra, out there, fighting, and Jamal, still, cuffed, and felt the weight crush her. She'd walked in to save this airport, but now she was a hunted shell, her victory's ash in her mouth. She ducked into a wooded patch, the trees swallowing her, and sank against a trunk, her breath ragged, her swollen jaw trembling. She'd lost the recorder, lost Sophia's trust, lost everything but her will. She thought of the emails, Terrell's, hack, and clung to a shred of hope. The governor might act, Marcus might push, but Richard was relentless, his next move lurking in the dark. She wiped mud from her hands, her bruised knuckles bleeding, and stood, slow and stiff, her boots sinking in the earth. She had to find Cassandra, had to warn her, but how? She'd sacrificed her last weapon, saved Sophia, but now she was the prey, a manhunt snapping at her heels. She glanced back, the motel's lights a distant glow, and felt the dread deepen. Richard had burned her evidence, framed her again, and he wasn't done. She thought of the fire at Cassandra's house, Sophia's terror, and shivered, the woods closing in. He'd taken her fight, her allies, and left her running, but she wasn't dead. She pushed forward, her battered body a testament to her grit. The night her only shield. Let him come. She'd be ready even from the shadows. Evelyn Jackson crouched in the damp woods, her battered body pressed against a gnarled oak, the night thick with the chirp of crickets and the distant wail of sirens. Her swollen jaw pulsed, her bruised ribs ached with every shallow breath, and her soaked uniform clung to her skin, mud caking her boots. Richard Callahan had torched her last recorder, framed her for Sophia's kidnapping, and launched a statewide manhunt, turning her sacrifice into a noose. She'd hacked his emails with Terrell, exposed his bribery network, saved Sophia, but he'd countered with fire and lies, stripping her bare. She was a fugitive, hunted, her daughter's house ash, Jamal cuffed, her name a curse, but she wasn't done. Rage burned in her gut, a coal that wouldn't die, and she gripped her empty hands, her bruised knuckles bleeding into the dirt. She had to end this, had to bury him, even if it killed her. She thought of Cassandra out there, fighting, and steeled herself. She'd make one last play, a gambit to break him. She staggered to a creek, splashing cold water on her face, the sting waking her battered senses, and plotted. She needed reach, a voice louder than Marcus Tate's articles, something Richard couldn't spin. She remembered a safe house, a rundown shack Terrell had mentioned, 2 miles north, a hacker's hideout with Wi-Fi and a signal booster. She limped through the trees, her battered thigh screaming, the woods a maze of roots and shadows until she reached it, a sagging wooden box with peeling paint, its windows boarded. She kicked the door open, dust swirling, and found a laptop, its battery low but alive, a tangle of cables spilling from a crate. She powered it up, her bruised fingers trembling, and connected to a live stream app, her face filling the grainy screen, a bruised warrior in a janitor's rags. She hit record, her voice a raw growl, and spoke. "This is Evelyn Jackson, the real me, not the lies you've heard. Richard Callahan runs Liberty Airport like a king, bribing cops, framing us, burning homes. Here's his voice, his truth." She played a snippet from memory, reciting his purge rant word for word, her tape gone but her mind a steel trap. "He beat me, framed me, kidnapped Sophia, torched my daughter's house. I'm hunted, but I'm here, telling you, he's the monster." She uploaded it, her breath hitching, and sent it wide, news sites, social media, every corner of the web. She leaned back, her swollen jaw trembling, thinking she'd won, that the world would see, that Richard's castle would crumble. By morning, the stream went viral, millions watching. Evelyn's last stand trending, protests erupting, the governor's phone ringing off the hook. She hid in the shack, the laptop's glow her only light, and watched the news, her bruised face on every screen, her voice a battle cry. Richard was arrested, cuffs snapping on his wrists outside the terminal, his gray suit rumpled, his grin gone. She exhaled, her battered ribs easing, a wild hope blooming. She'd done it, broken him, saved Cassandra's fight. She was wrong. The final blow came at dusk, a thunderclap in the quiet. She was sipping water from a cracked jug, her swollen jaw numb, when the shack's door splintered. Richard bursting in, free, his eyes wild with hate. "You think cuffs hold me?" he snarled, a pistol gleaming in his hand, his suit torn, his escape a mystery. She scrambled back, her bruised thigh buckling, the laptop crashing to the floor, but he lunged, slamming her against the wall, her head cracking wood. "I bribed my way out, you hag," he hissed, his breath hot, his gun jabbing her ribs. "You're done." She twisted, her nurse's instincts kicking in, but he fired, the shot grazing her side, a searing line of fire tearing through her. "Flesh!" She screamed, her voice raw, and grabbed a shard of glass from the broken window, slashing his arm, blood spraying. He roared, dropping the gun, and she kicked it away, her battered leg trembling, and bolted, the shack's walls blurring as she ran. She stumbled into the woods, her side bleeding, her breath a ragged sob, thinking she'd escaped, that he'd bleed out, that sirens would find him. She heard them then, faint but growing, cop cars closing in, drawn by her stream, her wound slowing her, but she kept moving, her swollen jaw clenched. She thought he was down, thought she'd won, until a news chopper buzzed overhead, its spotlight, missing her, its voice crackling through a radio on the ground. Richard Callahan escaped custody, suspect dead in shack, suicide confirmed. She froze, her bruised hands shaking, the words sinking in. He'd vanished, not bled out, not caught, but gone, a ghost in the night. She sank to her knees, her side oozing, her mind reeling. She'd broadcast the truth, toppled his arrest, but he'd slipped free, attacked her, and faked his end, leaving her bleeding, hunted, victorious, but broken. She thought of Cassandra, the protests, the tape's echo, and clung to it. Her breath, shallow, her swollen jaw trembling. She'd walked in to save this airport, but now she was a wounded fugitive, Richard a shadow, her gambit a double-edged sword. She crawled to a stump, her bruised ribs cracking, and pressed her hand to her side, blood seeping through her fingers. She'd lost him, lost her last stand, but not her fight. She thought of the stream, millions watching, and prayed it'd hold, that Cassandra would rise, that Jamal would walk free. She heard boots then, SWAT crashing through the brush, their shouts sharp, their guns glinting, drawn by her stream, her blood trail. She staggered up, her battered thigh buckling, and ran, her boots sinking in mud, the woods swallowing her again. She'd exposed him, wounded him, but he'd escaped, turned her victory into a chase. She thought of his gun, his snarl, and shivered, the night closing in. He wasn't dead, wasn't caught, and she wasn't safe. She pushed forward, her swollen jaw clenched, her side burning, the sirens a howl at her back. She'd lost everything, her home, her allies, her blood, but not her. Well, she glanced back, the shack a distant glow, and felt the dread deepen. Richard was out there, a phantom, his next move lurking in the dark. She thought of the glass shard, his blood, and clung to a shred of hope. She'd marked him, maybe slowed him, but he'd marked her too. A wound to carry, a fight to finish. She stumbled on, her battered body a testament to her grit, the woods her shield, the sirens her shadow. Let him come. She'd be ready, even bleeding, even running. Evelyn Jackson stumbled through the woods, her battered body a wreck of bruises and blood, her swollen jaw clenched against the searing pain in her side where Richard Callahan's bullet had grazed her. The night was a suffocating blanket, the distant hum of sirens and chopper blades fading as she pushed deeper into the tangle of trees, her soaked uniform tearing on thorns, her boots sinking into the mud. She'd broadcast her truth, a live stream from the shack that had gone viral, exposing Richard's crimes, sparking his arrest, only for him to escape custody and ambush her, his gun flashing, his blood spilling from her glass shard before he vanished, faking his death. She was bleeding, hunted, a fugitive branded a terrorist, kidnapper, thief. But she wasn't done. She had to reach Liberty Regional Airport. Had to finish this, even if it killed her. She thought of Cassandra, her daughter, fighting somewhere out there, and Jamal still cuffed, and clung to the fire in her gut, a coal that wouldn't die. She staggered out of the woods, the terminal's lights glowing 3 miles off. A beacon, in the dark, and limped toward it, her bruised ribs cracking. Her breath a ragged sob. She'd lost everything, her home, her allies, her blood, but not her will. She reached the employee lot by dawn, her side oozing, her swollen jaw numb, and slipped through a side door, the same rusted one she'd used to sneak back in days ago. The terminal buzzed, a chaotic hive of travelers and staff, their voices a dull roar over the clatter of suitcases. She pulled her cap low, hiding her bruised face, and hobbled toward the central concourse, her boots scuffing the tiles, her mind racing. She'd seen 30 staff cuffed in her mind's eye, a vision from her stream's fallout, and now she'd make it real. She rounded a corner near Gate 12, the same spot where Todd had shoved her cart, and froze. There they were, 30 of Richard's cronies, Todd, Lisa, the buzzcut guard, their badges yanked, their wrists bound, their faces pale as cops escorted them out, a mirror of her Hook's promise. Travelers gaped, whispers rippling, phones flashing, the scene a chaotic echo of her first strike. She leaned against a pillar, her side bleeding through her uniform, her swollen jaw trembling, and smirked, a fierce, fleeting thing. She'd done it, toppled them, even from the shadows, even bleeding. She thought it was over, thought she could rest, let Cassandra finish the fight. She was wrong. Her legs buckled, the blood loss hitting hard, and she sank to the floor, her bruised hands clutching her side, the terminal blurring into a haze of light and noise. She'd won, sure, but at what cost? She thought of Richard, out there, a ghost, and shivered, her battered body failing her. Then a shadow fell, sharp and steady, and she looked up, her vision swimming, to see Cassandra, her navy blazer crisp, her eyes wide with shock. "Mama!" she gasped, dropping to her knees, her hands pressing Evelyn's wound, warm and firm. "You're alive." Evelyn grinned, weak and wild, her voice a croak. "Told you I'd fix it." Cassandra's face tightened, tears glinting, but her voice was steel. "You did, but there's more." Evelyn frowned, her swollen jaw aching, her mind sluggish. More. She'd exposed Richard, freed Sophia, sparked this purge. What else was there? Cassandra leaned in, her breath hot on Evelyn's ear, and whispered, "I'm not the CEO, you are." Evelyn's heart stopped, her bruised hands trembling, the words a thunderclap in her skull. "What?" she rasped, her vision sharpening, Cassandra's face clear now, fierce and certain. "I resigned weeks ago," Cassandra said, her voice low, urgent. "Set it up with the board, made you the shadow CEO. I was your decoy, Mama, your shield. This whole time you were running it undercover, dismantling it from the bottom up." Evelyn's mind reeled, the terminal spinning, her swollen jaw dropping. She'd walked in as a janitor, a mother, a fighter, but CEO. She thought of the tape, the stream, the hack, and saw it twist, a kaleidoscope of truth. Cassandra had played the front, taken the hits, while Evelyn had wielded the axe, her every move a boardroom strike. She'd thought she was saving her daughter's airport, but it was hers, always hers. She staggered up, Cassandra's arm steadying, her side bleeding slower now, her bruised ribs easing under the weight of it. She'd won, not as a pawn, but as the queen, toppling Richard's empire with her own hands. Then the news hit, a TV above Gate 12 crackling. "Richard Callahan found dead, ditch off Highway 9, suicide confirmed." Evelyn froze, her swollen jaw clenching, her mind flashing to the shack, the glass shard. His blood. She hadn't killed him, hadn't chased him, but he'd run. Ended it himself. His empire gone, his lies exposed. She sank against Cassandra, her bruised hands shaking, relief crashing over her like a wave. He was dead, not by her hand, but by his own. A coward's exit. She'd thought he'd haunt her, a phantom striking from the dark. But he was dust, and she was still here, bleeding, but standing. The cops swarmed. 30 staff marched out, their cuffs glinting. their faces a gallery of defeat, Todd's wiry frame slumping, Lisa's ponytail limp, the buzz-cut guards snarling as they went. Travelers whispered, "That's her," pointing at Evelyn, not with hate now, but awe, her name a hymn on their lips. She straightened, her cap slipping, her bruised face bare, and felt the shift, the terminal hers, not Richard's. Cassandra handed her a badge, its brass gleaming. Evelyn, Jackson CEO, etched deep, its weight a crown she'd earned. She pinned it on, her swollen jaw trembling, her side still oozing, and stood tall, her battered body a testament to her war. She'd walked in to expose them, fought them, bled for them, and now she ruled them, a twist she'd never seen coming. She thought of Jamal, Sophia, the tape, the stream, and knew it wasn't over. She turned to Cassandra, her voice a gravelly thread. "This fight's just begun." And her daughter nodded, fierce and proud, her eyes glinting with the same fire. Evelyn stepped forward, her boots steady on the tiles, the terminal buzzing around her. A kingdom reclaimed. She'd lost her home, her blood, her peace, but gained this, a throne carved from grit and rage. She thought of Richard's ditch, his end, and felt no pity, only justice, cold and final. She'd walked in as a janitor, a mother, but walked out as the storm that uprooted them all, her legacy just starting to bloom. She glanced at the TV, her face still there, bruised but unbroken, and knew the world was watching, waiting, her next move a shadow on the horizon. Evelyn Jackson's journey in Black CEO's mom goes undercover as janitor to check staff at airport, fires entire team in an hour, reveals profound truths about resilience, justice, and the fight against systemic racism. First, her story teaches us that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet resolve to push through beatings, betrayal, and lies, like when she broadcast her truth despite bleeding from Richard's bullet. She didn't just survive, she turned invisibility into power, proving one voice can topple empires. Second, it shows how racism festers in silence, from Todd's shove to Richard's bribes, thriving until someone dares to expose it. Evelyn's grit flipped the script, making her the CEO she never knew she was, a twist that screams preparation meets opportunity. Third, allies matter. Jamal and Sophia paid prices for her fight, reminding us justice isn't solo. Finally, the enemy's downfall, Richard's suicide, underscores that evil often crumbles under its own weight when faced with relentless truth. Evelyn's tale isn't just a win, it's a call to see the unseen, to fight the unfought, to claim your place even when the world says you don't belong. So what's your takeaway? How far would you go to unmask injustice in your own backyard? Drop a comment with number 1 if Evelyn's fire inspires you. Hit like if you're ready to stand up, and subscribe and share to keep these stories alive. Thanks for joining this wild ride. Here's to more victories over hate, more strength in the shadows, and a future where every voice roars.